Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Shock Horror Theatre. My name is Ruben Crowley, and this is my review for Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. So, dear viewers, Frankenstein is the latest in a very long line of adaptations of Mary Shelley's 1818 novel. And with your permission, I would like to review this movie the only way I know how, badly. And let's start with a very brief synopsis of the film's story. We follow egotistical scientist Victor Frankenstein, whose pursuit to create new life results in dangerous consequences when his monstrous creation comes to life. I'm not going to be shy about how much I absolutely love this film, dear viewers. So let's get right into the review by first discussing what I loved about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. And an ideal place, for me anyway, to begin would be with the film's central performances. Most notably those of Oscar Isaac as Victor Frankenstein, Jacob Elordi as his creation, Maya Goth as Elizabeth, and Christoph Waltz as Heinrich Harlander. Oscar Isaac's Frankenstein seems to have more than a few things in common with Peter Cushing's rendition of the role, all the way back in 1957. This version of Frankenstein is egotistical, he's cruel, someone would say that he's disillusioned, and through a lot of actions that he undertakes in the film, that I'm not going to spoil for you here because of course I want you to see the film for yourself. By the end of this story, you will be in absolutely no doubt that Victor Frankenstein is the true monster here. Speaking of monsters, that leads me very nicely on to talking about Jacob Elordi, who might just be my favorite interpretation of Frankenstein's monster that I've ever seen. He's got that childlike innocence you might be familiar with if you've seen Boris Karloff's very famous portrayal of the character. This is a Frankenstein's monster that you will truly feel sorry for, not least because of the relationship that this film explores between him and Elizabeth, which again I'm not going to spoil here, but their scenes together reminded me of another famous novel, that being Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the relationship between Esmeralda and Quasimodo in that story. While a lot of interpretations of Frankenstein will have its central love story occurring between Victor and Elizabeth, this film goes in a slightly different direction. And if you were to tell me that you think the central love story in this interpretation is that between Elizabeth and the creature, well, I wouldn't think you were wrong. Speaking of Maya Goth, this is, to date, probably my favorite interpretation of her character, that being Elizabeth, who is usually relegated to love interest, damsel in distress, screaming banshee, but Del Toro gives her a lot more to do in this film than you might have seen in other adaptations of this story. And her performance is fantastic. In fact, every single person's performance in this film, be it Charles Dance as Victor's father, be it Christoph Waltz, who plays a very interesting character here that you won't find in Mary Shelley's original novel. Speaking of which, I absolutely love the way that Del Toro has somewhat faithfully adapted Mary Shelley's novel, while still taking a lot of dramatic license with the material. And I can safely say I absolutely adore what he did here, and even manages to find a couple of scenes that are, in my interpretation, a nod and a wink to the original movies of Universal. One in particular which sees Frankenstein's lab literally explode, which conjured to my mind the ending of Universal's The Bride of Frankenstein. What this film has that Universal's could not is an excessive use of violence. Now, I say excessive, but I'm not using it in a negative context. No. I think the violence in this movie does an absolutely amazing job of harking back to the Frankenstein movies of Hammer Horror, for example, which were notoriously more violent and sexually evocative than the Universal movies of the 1930s could ever be. And to go along with that violence, we also have absolutely magnificent practical effects here. Excellent use of puppetry, fake body parts, gruesome death sequences, including one in which a man literally has his jaw ripped off from his face, another where a particular character falls to his death and his skull literally bursts open at the back. So you can expect lashings and lashings of blood to go along with the gothic drama. And to go along with that drama, we also have an absolutely stupendous musical score by Alexandre Desplat. I honestly cannot say enough nice things about how much I absolutely love this movie. But no movie is perfect, so was there anything about Frankenstein that I didn't like so much? I only really have two tiny nitpicks, and they're all to do with the third act of the film. If you're used to seeing movies like The Bride of Frankenstein, Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or hell, even Young Frankenstein, you might be expecting to see The Bride of Frankenstein here, and while I do think there was a way to make that happen in this particular version, Del Toro, for reasons of his own probably, chose not to, and I personally would have really loved to see what he would have done with that. But like I said, tiny nitpick, and to go along with that, I do think that the third act of the film is definitely the shortest section of the runtime, and I would have maybe liked it to be just a little bit longer, to see more of Victor's pursuit of his creation after, shall we say, dramatic events have occurred. But like I said, two very, very, very tiny nitpicks. So I absolutely, wholeheartedly recommend that all you Mary Shelley fans out there, all you Frankenstein fanatics, or hell, even you fans of gothic horror, I demand that you go out and see Frankenstein at your earliest convenience. And you'll be happy to hear that it's on Netflix right bloody now, so from what I understand, most people have a Netflix membership these days, so get this movie watched. Therefore, I declare that Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is a gothic masterpiece. So there you have it, ghouls and ghosts, my review for this latest iteration of Frankenstein. If you enjoyed this little review of mine, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. If you haven't enjoyed it, well then, feel free to give me a thumbs down. And as the great Mary Shelley herself once said, a human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or a transitory desire to disturb his tranquility.